Well, hello again, everyone. Here I am in my shed with the picture of George Bernard Shaw's shed on the wall, working on a little side project this morning. This is something that I wrote originally for my son because I realised that he didn't know how to write an essay. I don't mean he didn't know what an essay should be like. I mean that he just didn't know where to start. And I think this is often the most difficult thing about writing. I find it myself, the horror of the empty page, the difficulty, the sense that one has to begin at the beginning and write an introduction and everything else will follow. This is crazy. It's like imagining that Michelangelo sat and looked at the top of the Sistine roof of the Sistine Chapel and then started at the far left corner and painted his way along, and all of a sudden this masterpiece emerged. Of course not. He started in the background, in the middle, round the bits that matter. These are the kind of things that we have to do in an essay. And the truth of it is, essays aren't especially big and they aren't especially clever. They're just hard work and you need to know how to do them. So here, because I thought that there might be people beyond my beloved son who want to know how to write an essay in 12 steps or how to write a great essay in 12 steps, here is my little guide. So hopefully, if you do what I say, step by step, do the steps in order, don't skip any, hopefully it will make the process less stressful and help you get decent marks. I'm not claiming this will make you a first-class, wonderful, fantastic essay writer, but it might stop you weeping at 3 o'clock in the morning when the deadline is the very next day. So, do exactly as I tell you. Step number 1. Start in good time. This may seem elementary advice, but essays always take longer than you think, and they're much easier without a looming deadline, because part of that horror, the horror of the empty page, is realising that you've got so much work to do and you've only got till tomorrow morning to do it. The best way to avoid the essay stress altogether is to simply get going in good time. Step number 2, and this one is very important. Choose your question carefully. Now, because we teach in a certain way, and because we structure our courses in a way that suggests we thought about them, and because we like students to show that they've learned something in our courses, then generally speaking, the questions that we ask in essays will point to topics that have been discussed in lectures. And usually each lecture will have a takeaway point, a single argument, which is often flagged up as a learning outcome at the beginning or a summary slide just at the end of the lecture. So the questions are likely to explore and interrogate these arguments. You're likely to get one question per lecture, or at least one per topic. More difficult questions might cut across. They might ask you to pursue a theme that has been explored in several different lectures. And these questions are perhaps best avoided until you're more confident in essay writing. So choose a question that links to a lecture you attended and you understood. Now, a little thing, if there's a technical term in the question or a term that looks as if it might have a specific meaning but you're not quite sure, make sure that you understand what that is or don't write the essay. Final thing, avoid the deceptively easy question. Of course, I've never done something like this, but sometimes it's tempting to throw a question in that looks very straightforward, especially to someone who hasn't been to the lectures. If you think, for example, that you can answer this particularly niche question on the sociology of finance out of something you learnt in economics, possibly you should be doing a different question, something else that you do know what's going on. When you have decided on your question, write it in full at the top of your essay. You would be amazed how many students don't do this. Or, even worse, they write a question that is slightly different, or their own interpretation of the question, or a question that they'd much prefer to answer rather than the question they've been set. You must answer the question, so write it at the top and use it as a guide or an aid memoir throughout the process. Now, to the nitty-gritty, step 4. Bullet point your argument. Go back to the lecture Go back to the notes or the video or your recording of the lecture most relevant to your question and make a list of the bullet points that sum up the key points of the argument. I would suggest 10 bullet points is a good line. I'm thinking around a 2,500 word essay here, standard sort of length, so 10 bullet points is about right. Step 5. Put these bullet points into whole sentences and do so in your own words, slipping away from that temptation to simply cut and paste what's on the slides that your lecturer has given you so kindly. Step number 6. Organise these sentences into a coherent order. That's a coherent order for answering the question that you're trying to answer in this essay. The logical order might run: here's the topic, here's what it means in more detail. Some people, by which I mean from the literature that you've read or some citations, whatever it may be, say that X is Y. Here is lots of supporting evidence. Here's a quote or two, referenced of course. Others say that Y is X. And here is some evidence that suggests, that these people are right, that it is in fact Y is X. On balance, it seems that. Now, remember, and this is crucial, that writing is thinking. It's like painting that old master from the top left corner or starting in the middle. As you start to work these ideas out, your overall argument will emerge. That's why you can't write from the introduction. You can't write the introduction until you've written the rest of the essay, because you haven't figured it out yet. Writing is thinking. Step number 7. Enlarge each sentence into a 200-word paragraph. Now, keep your point, keep the sentence that you've already written as the first sentence. The first sentence of a paragraph should always be a summary of its content. You're allowed a short sentence beforehand as a lead-in or connection, and I'm going to come back to adding these later. But for now, keep these elongated bullet points that are the structure of your essay, keep them as the beginning of the paragraphs. Then build up the rest of the paragraphs using further material from the lectures, arguments taken and reference from the readings, core or otherwise, quotations from the text in question if you're studying English or something like that. When you use a quotation, make sure you explain what you think is going on. Comment on it rather than just letting it sit there. The marker can't see inside your mind. Just because it's patently obvious to you the link between A and B doesn't mean that it will be to the marker. So make everything explicit. And this now is a good time to do the reading. If you haven't already, of course, I'm sure that you have. But use this reading, use your notes from the reading to fill out these paragraphs. If you find different or contrary arguments, all the better. And I'm assuming, as I said before, a 2,500 word essay. But I would say that a longer essay doesn't need more points. It needs more detail around each point. So stick with the 10 bullets, the 10 sentences, the 10 paragraphs, fill them out. And of course, you can split the paragraphs as you go on. 7.B, working it up. This is the nuts and bolts of it. This is the prosaic routine work of writing an essay. Just proving the dough, developing your arguments, filling it out, bringing in all this detail, nuts and bolts, bits and bobs that you've collected as you've been reading around the topic. And as you do so, your argument will be clear in your own mind. The essay will emerge almost spontaneously from this space where previously there was nothing on the page. Remember, writing is thinking. You don't have to have all the ideas worked out before you start. And in fact, there's no real reason why you have to do this in order. Just tackle points as you come across them, as you find the material, fill them up. You can sort them all out afterwards. And yes, I am indeed cheating on the steps. So 7C. Make sure each sentence is grammatically correct with a noun and a verb. It's basic, but it's important. And if you're not confident in writing long, elaborate paragraphs or whatever, use short, simple sentences. George Orwell, one of the great prose stylists of the 20th century, made a career out of short, punchy little sentences. Admittedly, he had some other things as well, but still. Don't use rhetorical questions. It's such a shame when an argument is building up nicely and all of a sudden one hits, surely this would mean that. Don't use surely. The American philosopher Daniel Dennett calls it the surely klaxon. This is the point. When there's a surely in the argument, this is the point where the writer is failing to be able to marshal the evidence to convince. Just state, give your evidence, press towards a conclusion. And on that note, show and don't tell. Don't just make unsupported assertions or wild claims. Give evidence. Use other people's voices. You've been given all these wonderful scholarly journals or books to look through, people who spent their entire careers writing this material, some people who were really genuinely much cleverer than most of us. And finally, don't write "I think." Nobody cares. Nobody gives a monkeys what you think. I don't mean that in an unpleasant way. It's just not part of the discipline of essay writing. Use the voices of the literature to marshal and assemble an argument. Step 8. So by now, what does your essay look like? It looks like a coherently organised set of paragraphs, each with a short sentence saying what's going to happen in the rest of the paragraph and then supporting evidence underneath. But it's still not very readable. Lots of essays actually arrive at the marker's desk just like this, and you've got to remember that you might be you might be 187th in the pile of 200, and it's 1 in the morning, and the marker is tired. Help them, lead them by the hand through your argument. So use the beginning of each sentence, the very introductory of each paragraph, the very introductory sentence, the last paragraph of the last sentence of the paragraph before, just to lead the reader through. Tell them what's happening, tell them what you've said, tell them what's going to happen next, and so this means that. And this can be illustrated, all these kind of joining text. You can think of them, if you like, as subheaders written into the text. This essay is shown how X is Y. Some critics, however, suggest that X is X. Read through your paragraphs, smoothing them out. And even if you've got time, if you're not in the library at 2 a.m, read your writing aloud to see how it sounds. Now, by this point, you should have 2,000 words of reasonably well organised, argued and supported text. Assuming that you have footnotes and references, you've probably got about 600 words left, so divide these in half. And write your introduction with half of these remaining words. The golden rule for academic writing is say what you're going to say it, and say what you've said. So your introduction could begin in just like this, or in slightly more elaborate terms. This essay discusses the question. It first of all says this, then it says that, then it says this, then it says that. It concludes that it presents some counter arguments and concludes. This is a boring but effective introduction. You could brighten it up a bit with a little bit of colour, with a quotation or a commentary from the text to show why this is important or relevant. But don't, please don't, quote Spider-Man. I can't tell you how many Spider-Man quotations I've had in my essays over the years, and he's just the worst. He's the worst superhero. I might let you off with Bane, perhaps, but not Superman. Step 10. Write your conclusion. You've now got 300 words left. This is the introduction in reverse, with just a little bit more effort spent on pulling it together one way or other, suggesting a conclusion. This is a little moment where you can stamp your own authority on what you've made. But don't say "I think." Say, on the basis of the literature that I've reviewed, or the evidence that I've reviewed, or the arguments that I've compiled, it can be seen that. That's just a clever and posh and intellectual way of saying "I think," but you get good marks for it, whereas not the other. Now, finally, this may seem like a little leftover, but it's not. This is one of the most crucial bits of all. Edit, edit, edit. Polish your essay. You might have too many words. So cutting words, that always helps. Read through, asking ruthlessly what each paragraph or each sentence adds. Often when we speak, we say the same things twice, and we do the same when we write. So you can cut 1 or 2 of these out. If you've got time, let the essay sit for a day or two. Come back to it with fresh eyes. Reread the whole thing for spelling and grammar. It's such a shame when an essay that is teetering on the brink of a first or a 2-1 slips back into the category beneath because it's just shoddily put together. And for this very same reason, references really matter. They matter because they're a kind of competency test of tidiness, of quality of work. Like your driving instructor expects you to indicate right before you pull across the road. It's just one of those things that you have to do. And students never really understand this, but lecturers get very upset about these matters. So make sure you get your references tidy and in the format that is demanded. And step 12. You're done! To the bar! But don't forget to hand the essay in first. I hope this helps and it makes your essay writing less stressful, more productive, better organised, and that your grades move accordingly. Till then, good luck!